This is a story of extreme suffering and tremendous hope. The atrocities of Hitler and the Nazis are well known, but many people don't know that Joseph Stalin killed over 20 million people during his reign of terror. People often say to me, "Ruta, I know my history. How is it that I have never heard this story before?"
I don't like to talk about this because when I do, my heart aches. It hurts too much.
I've always been interested in my Lithuanian heritage, and growing up in the States with a name like Ruta Sepetys, which in Lithuanian is Ruta Sepetys, has always raised questions. People hear my name and they say, "What are you?" And I answer, "I'm Lithuanian." So it's always been a part of my identity. But it was when I was in Lithuania meeting with cousins and I naively asked, "So, do you have any photos of my grandparents or of my father?" And the room suddenly became very quiet. And they said, "No, Ruta, we had to burn them all. We couldn't let anyone know that we were related to your grandfather." And that's when I knew that I had to tell this story. The Baltic countries of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are located just under Finland on the western side of Russia, and they are a warm water port to the Atlantic. In 1939, Hitler and Stalin signed a pact of non-aggression, and Stalin got the Baltics. So in 1940, the Baltics were annexed into the Soviet Union, and the countries of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia disappeared from maps. Stalin drafted lists of those he considered anti-Soviet, and those included military personnel, doctors, lawyers, business owners, teachers, librarians, even priests and children. And they had committed no crime. They were all arrested, the men separated from the women. Everyone was stuffed into cattle cars. The men went to prison, and the women were sent to Siberia. And with no risk of pregnancy, Stalin's plan for genocide would be complete. However, he underestimated their will to live. The Baltics were under Soviet occupation for over 50 years, until 1990, 1991. Those who suffered didn't dare breathe a word of it in fear of the Soviet secret police. But some brave people buried the story or incorporated it into art and music. And in my book, the main character is a 15-year-old artist, and she documents her entire experience through her drawings and her letters, and she buries it in a jar, hoping that one day someone will discover it and the world will know the truth. I did a lot of research in writing the book, and I took a couple trips to Lithuania. I met with survivors, historians, family members, members of parliament. I spent time in an actual train car that was used for the deportations, and I also spent time in a Soviet prison. There were so many labor camps across Siberia. I decided to write about the people who were deported to the Arctic because the conditions were just so unfathomable.
We usually stacked the dead bodies in a hut, but Romus was determined to bury her. So he chopped a hole in the ground. It took him 2 days to cut a hole with some kind of stick, but we did bury her. And then after that, we were totally on our own, and we were on death's doorstep all the time.
One survivor in particular, Irena, spent hours with me, and she gave me such vivid detail, and I was so moved. And I've incorporated quite a few details that Irena told me about her family's experience into the novel.
From inside one of the cattle cars, packed with men, someone called to me, and he pulled off his wedding ring and slipped it to me through the slat. "You will need this to feed yourselves. Give this to your mother. You'll need it for food. and tell Romas from now on he's got to take care of the family. Then the soldiers grabbed me and dragged me back to the other car. That was the last time I ever saw my father.
It took me a year to write the book, and then I revised it quite a bit. In fact, when I turned in the first draft of this book, we laughed and said it was the Lithuanian version of Wuthering Heights. It was so dark. So I had to revise quite a bit, which I love. I love revising as much as I love writing. I look for characters that might not be classically beautiful, but have a beautiful capacity to love, if that makes sense. And these people in Lithuania, they were both. They were beautiful, and they had a beautiful capacity to love and to teach kindness in an atmosphere of cruelty.
While we were in the Arctic, and people all around us were dying of starvation, I remember my mother once asked a god, "Why have you gone through all the trouble of bringing us out here to Siberia, only to starve and work us to death?" He answered, and I'll never forget it. He said, "We don't need your death. We need your pain and suffering." That's how cruel and evil it all was.
In my interviews with survivors, from time to time, I would find someone who told me that someone from the NKVD had secretly helped them in some way or showed them some form of kindness. And that really interested me, and that person was a hero to me. And that's also how I came up with the title of the book, because between shades of gray, sometimes there's a small crack that can let the love shine in.
I felt pains all the time. The pain is present all day, every day, thinking of my family starving somewhere, up in the far north near the Arctic Ocean.
I met with a survivor who told me that his baby brother had died, and they made a coffin for him, and in the morning they found his body lying on the ground, and someone had stolen the baby's coffin for firewood. And I was shocked and immediately said, "Well, weren't you angry?" And he said, "Ruta, how could I be angry? That firewood might have saved someone's life that night." It's incredible that anybody survived these camps in the Arctic. I tell people, read the book and ask yourself, would I survive? Because my grandfather was part of the Lithuanian military, he would have been executed by Stalin. So he escaped with my grandmother and my father, and my grandfather never went back to Lithuania.
We left because my father was a high-ranking officer, and when the Russians occupied it in 1940, they were arresting the officers and executing them outside of Kaunas. I think it's difficult to understand what freedom is, because there are so many things that we take for granted, and until somebody takes them away, we just assume that's part of life.
They wiped away our presence. They removed every trace of us, as though we never existed. I don't want to judge them. Let God be their judge.
Freedom is not appreciated until you lose it.
I just hope more people can learn about these terrible times of terror, so that what they did wrong in the past, crimes committed by the communists on us, would never happen again.
People have asked, what's your goal in writing this obscure story? And I've said that my dream would be for this story to find its way into libraries and schools, and to teachers, so this part of history won't be lost.
I have hope for the future. They tried to destroy us, and as you have seen, they failed. So I am hopeful.
I know that this novel has a lot of brutality, but to me, I see equal portions of love in this novel. And to me, I do see it as a love story, for whether love of God, love of country, love of another human being. love reveals to us the miraculous nature of the human spirit. And I know it sounds cheesy, but I truly believe that love can save your life. You know, to love something so deeply and so much that it becomes the very life within you that sustains you. That shows us that love is the most powerful army. And it's not about bombing, it's about believing. I grew up in Michigan, spent many years in LA, and now I live in Tennessee. This is my first novel. I've actually worked in the music business for 20 years, trying to find the courage to send my writing to someone. And I wrote the book, but really, history wrote this story. And I am so grateful to Philomel and Penguin and Writers House and the many publishers worldwide who have taken a chance on me and are helping me bring this story out of the dark. I'm sorry, can we stop?